can you explain the Greece economic meltdown to me? What caused it? So, we want to look into the Greece economic meltdown, because we don't want to go through something like that in our own country. Let's learn about their meltdown. Wait. The Greek economic crisis. Greece meltdown. Roughly 2009 to 2018. Wait, you telling me they had a 9-year meltdown? What? This went on for 9 years? Was one of the worst debt crises in modern history. Here's what caused it. All right. Number one, living beyond its means for decades. Greece consistently spent far more than it collected in taxes. I mean, like, running a deficit right there. Running large budget deficits year after year. It borrowed heavily to fund generous public sector wages, pensions, and social programs. The government was essentially funding a lifestyle it couldn't afford. If you have a large deficit, you are funding a lifestyle you cannot afford. That's just how finance. This is what's happening in everything right now in Canada. We are funding a lifestyle we can't afford. We've been running consistent deficits. Like, that's just how it works. The euro made it worse. So, from my understanding, a lot of the European Union, or I think all of it, uses the euro as a currency, which is managed not by the country, but by the European Union itself. This means you don't have control over printing. Um, so, in this situation, a country actually functions similar to like a state in the US or a province in Canada. Um, because it is using a currency it itself does not fully control. Um, which means you can't print money and inflate your way out of any issue. As destructive as that is for your people, you don't ever default. When Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001, it suddenly had access to cheap borrowing at near German interest rates. Lenders assumed Eurozone members were safe. Greece took full advantage, borrowing massively at low rates, but without the economic productivity to back it up. Cooking the books. Greece actively hid the true scale of its deficit from EU authorities. With help from Goldman Sachs using complex financial instruments. Oh, great. When the real numbers came out around 2009, 2010, markets panicked. 4. The weak tax collection and corruption. Tax evasion in Greece was rampant, almost culturally normalized. The state collected far less than it was owed, while public sector corruption inflated spending. That's one of the things, like, what was it, like investing in tax collection is one of the best investments a country can do. Because if you invest in tax collection and enforcement, then you actually collect the proper taxes, and usually it's just more than what people usually pay. Because getting around taxes is something that has always existed. This structural gap between revenue and expenditure was never flagged. 2008, global financial crisis as a trigger. The global crash tightened credit markets worldwide. Greece's debt suddenly looked terrifying to investors, who demanded much higher interest rates, which made Greece's debt even more unaffordable, creating a vicious spiral. I think we're seeing a much smaller spiral currently in the U.S. Where their debt looks looks scary. Trump is trying to bring rates down, right? But I don't know if his central bank is going to listen to it. And it sounds like the rates are gonna stay, if not go up. We demand much higher interest rates, yeah. And I mean, when you have a large debt, you're kind of at the mercy of interest. Like, the bigger the debt, the smaller the change of our interest rate has a bigger effect just because of its size, which made Greece's debt even more unaffordable, creating a vicious spiral. Loss of market access. By 2010, Greece could no longer borrow on open markets at sustainable rates. It had to be bailed out by the EU, EBC, and IMF 3 times, totaling over 300 billion euro. It's crazy. The consequences. The austerity conditions attached to the bailout were brutal. GDP shrank by roughly 25%, worse than the US Great Depression. Unemployment peaked at 27%, youth unemployment hit 60%, pensions were slashed repeatedly, mass immigration of young, educated Greeks, mass immigration, so the leaving of young, educated Greeks, hospital and public services collapsed. Like, if you live beyond your means for too long, this happened. This is not good. Like, these are things that take decades to fix, if they're fixable at all. A shrink of 25% of GDP. Unemployment peaked at 27%. Youth unemployment hit 60%. Pensions were slashed repeatedly. Mass immigration of young, educated Greeks. Hospital and public services collapsed. A core problem in one sentence. Greece had the spending habits of a rich northern European country, but the tax collection and productivity of a much weaker economy. And the euro removed the usual escape valve of devaluing your currency. Greece officially exited its bailout program in 2008, though its debt burden and economic scars remain significant to this day. Can you go into more detail about the consequences of the collapse? Also, what issues persist to this day? I wanted to expand on this section, and then I want to know, like, are there still problems because of this? This was 2009. So, looking at a while ago. Let's see. So basically, it didn't have good tax collection. It lived beyond its means, putting everything into debt for multiple years. What was it? Goldman Sachs helped them hide their helped to hide the true scale of the deficit using complex financial instruments. If there's ever a reason not to trust Goldman Sachs, right there. They knew what they were doing. And they did it anyway. Okay, great question. The consequences were sweeping, economical, social, and deeply human. Here's a detailed breakdown. The consequences of the collapse. Economic devastation. The scale of the economic contraction was historic. Between 2009 and the peak of the crisis, unemployment had rocketed to over 27% in 2013. So this is 4 years after the start. This is something that got progressively worse for 4 years. And more than 60% of young adults were left without jobs. By 2015, more than a third of the population was at risk of poverty and social exclusion. In 2012 alone, income had dropped by roughly 50%. Income, so how much people made, had dropped by 50%. What? Something tells me house prices didn't drop 50%. Just what people were making. Greece is the only EU economy that had still not recovered to its 2008 GDP level. Oh, okay, let me start again. Greece is the only EU economy that had still not recovered to its 2008 GDP level, even by end of 2023, sitting at a roughly negative 18.4% of its pre-crisis output, making clear the Greek economic crisis was by no means belongs entirely in the past. So their economic crisis, their economy is still 18.4% lower than 2008. So their economy is not recovered. In what, 18 years? And it still hasn't recovered. That is crazy. That's austerity.
Austerity.
Yeah. Definition. Austerity refers to strict, simple, or minimalistic living. Minimalistic living. In economic terms, it describes specific governing policies aimed at reducing budget deficit during financial crisis. So, austerity, a reduction in living standard. Okay. Austerity. 12 rounds of cuts. The government enacted 12 rounds of tax increases. Okay, so they're facing an income drop of 50% while facing tax increases. Why would any of the young Greeks stay? %60 unemployment rate on top of that? Like, that's terrible. The government enacted 12 rounds of tax increases, spending cuts, and reforms from 2010 to 2016, which at times triggered local riots and nationwide protests. The fiscal adjustments required of Greece was by far the largest of any bailed out Eurozone country, more than double what Portugal or Ireland had to endure. They were living that far I mean, be careful if your government starts working with Goldman Sachs, because they're hiding something. And it could come back to just destroy your country. Healthcare system near collapse. Public health expenditures were cut by 25% during 2008 to 2012, leading to shortages of health professionals, reduced salaries, pension cuts, decrease in medical supplies, and inadequate primary health care. By 2015, only 86% of the population was covered by public health insurance, down from 100% in 2008. Oh, so they started throwing people off their public health care, with the long-term unemployed most affected. Mental health crisis. The human toll went beyond economics. Suicide rates increased by 35%, and the prevalence of major depression rose from 3.3% in 2008 to 12.3% in 2013. Major depression. Okay. Both unemployment and financial hardships were found to independently drive suicidality. Some suicides were directly attributed to social causes rather than pre-existing mental illnesses. Mental health funding was simultaneously cut by 20% in 1 year and by an additional 55% the next. The brain drain, like this is one of the this is one of the really dangerous ones, and it's one of the ones you don't feel now. You feel 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years down the road when your country suddenly stops innovating completely because all the people that would innovate have left. And you suddenly see no growth. But it's definitely, it's one of the most dangerous ones. It is also one of the few you can turn around. Like if you bring living standards up, you can bring people back. I think we've seen this to a degree in Poland, where a lot of Poles left, and they're actually bringing people, from my understanding, back to the country now. But it's really dangerous. One of the most lasting wounds was mass immigration. Hundreds of thousands of well-educated Greeks left the country. Doctors, engineers, academics, seeking opportunities elsewhere in Europe. This hollowed out the very workforce Greece needed for its recovery. One Greek expat living in Germany put it bluntly: post-crisis, if you don't have connections with government or party officials, it's difficult to find a job. Political radicalization. The crisis destabilized Greek democracy profoundly. The neo-Nazi party Golden Dawn rose to become Greece's third largest party during the unrest, feeding off despair and anger. Golden Dawn eventually collapsed after its leaders were convicted of running a criminal organization, losing all parliament seats in 2009 and dissolving shortly after. The issue that persists today: debt still enormous. At end 2024, Greece's public debt remains elevated at about 150% of GDP. Ooh. So they've been doing austerity for what, 18 years? And their debt is still 150% of GDP. Remember, anything over 70% will start to massively impact growth. It'll be like a wet blanket on top of an economy. One of the highest ratios in the world. While it's falling, it remains massive structural vulnerability. I mean, like you have to pay your debts, right? And they're still working on it. Wages still depressed. The average monthly salary of 1,175 euros is still about 20% lower than it was 15 years ago, before the onset of the crisis. Greeks are earning less in real terms today than they were before the crash. Unemployment still above EU's worst. The unemployment rate remains the second highest in the EU after Spain. How bad is Spain? And labor force participation remains among the lowest in the EU, especially for women. Bureaucracy and structural weakness. The economic environment remains burdened by bureaucracy, slow procedures, and partial inefficient of sectors of the state. Issues that analysts say must be addressed to create a truly investment-friendly environment. Housing and cost of living. Airbnb has artificially inflated rents in tourist areas like Athens, and many struggle with the cost of living. Young people, especially, are disgruntled, and many still leave the country to seek better job opportunities. Demographic time bomb. Greece faces an unfavorable demographic outlook. An aging population combined with years of youth immigration means fewer workers supporting more retirees, putting long-term pressure on pensions and public finances. Let me make sure I'm getting this one. Immigration and immigration?
Emigration.
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 Immigrate. This is the immigration, the act of leaving your home country or region, permanently settle in an. That's what I figured, but good to be sure. The silver lining, cautionary. There is genuine progress. Greece has staged a remarkable economic recovery over the past 5 years, with growth outpacing the EU average. I mean, it's still at 18% behind its 2008 numbers. A significant rebound in investment, historical high exports, and declining unemployment. The primary budget surplus reached 4.8% of GDP in 2024, achieved not through further austerity but through economic growth and cracking down on tax evasion. Greece returned to investment-grade credit rating in 2023 after a lost decade of exclusion, with borrowing costs now lower than those of Italy and even France. But as one Athens resident summed it up, if you tell everyday Greeks the economy is heading in a positive direction, you're likely to get their hairy eyeball in return. The numbers are improving, but the lived reality of a generation scarred by a decade of crisis is slow to heal. I mean, what a cautionary tale. Right there. 18 years after the crisis was initiated, they're still 150% in debt. Their debt is still 150% of GDP. And like they say that the economy is rebounding, but their GDP is still, where was it, 18% below its pre-crisis levels. Holy crap. You do not want this to happen in your country. This is why I'm always scared of deficit spending, right? Because fundamentally deficit spending is living beyond your means. Now, if there's a crisis, like a US trade war on you, pushes your deficit, it pushes you into a deficit, spending deficit for a year or two, I understand, but you always want to be a surplus. You always need to come back to a surplus when times are good. The issue is, for most nations, they deficit spend, and then they just less deficit spend in the good times, but then they go back to deficit spending in the bad times, and it's a downward trend until something breaks. And something broke in Greece, and this is what happened. In 18 years later, their economy is still 18% smaller than it was before the crisis. We do not want that. Ooh, they're in overtime. 2-2. Anyone's game. Game 7. Okay. I wanted to watch how a debt crisis ruined Greece. And we'll have a look at that. Now that
What if I told
now that we have some context. Okay. So, how debt crises were in Greece by casual economic.
you that one country's budget mischief triggered a debt crisis that shook Europe and nearly tore the European Union apart?
So those are all the countries in the European Union. I know Norway's like EU adjacent. Yeah, kind of just stretched down here and got to Greece. Switzerland always tries to stay out of area.
Greece, known for producing some of the greatest thinkers, wars, and culture in human history, its legacy is cemented for having one of the most iconic ancient civilizations. However, in the span of a few years, the country went from the excitement of joining the European Union and hosting the Olympics to complete economic collapse. But what exactly caused Greece to have Europe's worst debt crisis in the modern day, and could it have been avoided? Let's start in 1999. Europe is riding high on post-Cold War optimism, and the European Union introduces a revolutionary idea: a single currency to unite the continent economically and politically. No more exchanging francs for Deutschmarks or currency fluctuations hurting trade. Just one currency, the euro, to bind Europe together. But there was a catch. To join this exclusive Euro club, countries had to meet strict criteria known as the Maastricht criteria, with a budget deficit below 3% of GDP, total debt below 60% of GDP, and also needed to maintain low inflation.
All good ideas. How many currently meet this? Like, if this is what you have to meet to join, I don't think you have to meet this to continue to be a part of it, because total debt less than 60% of GDP. Debt to GDP map. Okay, let's see if we can find this. Map. Okay. United States 120%, Canada 100 something, 110. But look, 113, 101, 94, 63. They're just above. 135. Ooh, yeah, that's Greece still at 150, right? These are all members in the EU or above. Above 60. So clearly this isn't a continuous thing. It's just if you want to be part of the club, you have to meet these ones.
And these rules were designed to ensure only financially stable countries could adopt the euro. For most of Europe, this was challenging but achievable. For Greece, it would be nearly impossible. In the late 1990s, Greece's economy was a mess. Tax evasion was rampant, with an estimated 1/3 of economic activity going unreported. And government spending was out of control. Public sector jobs were handed out freely to political supporters, and the number of public employees rapidly rose. Meanwhile, the debt to GDP ratio averaged over 102% from 1981 to 1993, nearly double the allowed limit. Greece faced a lose-lose choice: either undertake painful reforms and spending cuts to meet the criteria, or painfully watch from the sidelines as the rest of Europe moved forward without them. Missing out on the euro meant economic isolation, higher borrowing costs, and the humiliation of being left behind. Greece chose the third option: cheat.
There was no third option. You just didn't like either of the current option. So rather than making a hard decision, you just cheated.
Enter Goldman Sachs, the Wall Street giant known for creative problem solving. In 2001, Goldman presented Greece with an elegant solution to their impossible problem.
Don't take it. Don't take it. It's going to cause problems. It will cause problems. The problem will be 18 years later, your economy is still 20%, 18% smaller.
It is 105%. The euro limit is 60%. Can you help? We can use cross-currency swaps to move debt off your balance sheet. Well, that sounds illegal. It's not illegal. It's financial engineering. Our fee is around 300 million euros. Using complex financial instruments called currency swaps, Goldman helped Greece move billions in debt off its balance sheet. On paper, Greece's deficit looked small enough to meet EU requirements. In reality, Greece was simply hiding its debt through accounting tricks, borrowing money
I mean, once you start doing that, something tells me it's gonna be really hard to go back to normal reporting. We see this issue in China, where a lot of their essentially provinces or state level governments were incentivized to make the numbers look good. And so they made the numbers look good. And they did that by creative accounting and, maybe under-reporting or over-reporting a little bit. But then they needed to do it the next year too. And then you had to do it the next year, and you had to do that the next year, and do that the next year. And then all of a sudden, this adds up, and your creative reporting is now a significant amount of the report. And now you got a problem. And they have a problem there, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to fix it. But it is a cycle. Once you start, it's like, oh, we can get away with this. Just like any criminal or any bad deed, once you find out you can get away with it, you go further, and then you go further, and eventually your entire economy melts.
disguised as currency trades with the real costs pushed years into the future. And it worked, and Greece adopted the euro on January the 1st, 2001. The early years felt like a dream come true, and people were optimistic. Borrowing costs plummeted, with the euro's credibility backing Greek bonds. Investors treated Greek debt almost as if it were German debt. Money flooded into Athens. The government ramped up spending on public sector salaries, pensions, and infrastructure. Then came the ultimate show.
Like when you have a windfall like this, the best thing to do is fund a sovereign wealth fund with the windfall. Like as soon as you start accounting and considering the windfall as just normal operating, that is when you run into problems.
Case. Greece won the bid to host the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens.
Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening in the first overtime. Okay. They're really dragging that one out.
This was it, a chance to show the world that modern Greece could revive its ancient glory.
Okay.
The nation was electric with pride. The price tag? Over 9 billion euros.
How big is Greece? What's the population of Greece? What size are we looking at? 9.9 million people. So 1/4 the size of Canada.
Nearly double the original budget. But with cheap credit flowing and euphoria in the air, who was counting? For ordinary Greek citizens, these were golden years. The economy was booming, jobs were everywhere, and after decades of being seen as Europe's poor cousin, Greece finally felt like its moment had arrived. By the mid-2000s, Greeks were enjoying a standard of living they'd never experienced before. Wages rose, consumer spending boomed, the future looked bright. But underneath the surface, the fundamentals were rotten. Tax collection remained abysmal. Government bloat continued unchecked, productivity lagged far behind Northern Europe, and the debt kept mounting, hidden beneath layers of innovative accounting. Soon, the bill would come due. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Banks collapsed, credit markets froze. For Greece, the timing couldn't have been worse. Tourism, one of Greece's leading industries, collapsed as recession-wary travelers stayed home.
In 2008, I guess during the financial crash, everyone was feeling the pressure, right? And so there was just less tourism generally.
Shipping revenues dried up and tax receipts plummeted even further. And suddenly, Greece needed to borrow even more money to make up for its collapsing tax revenues, just as global lenders were getting nervous. Then things would go from bad to worse. In October 2009, Greece's newly elected government revealed the truth. Previous administrations had been systematically lying about the country's finances. Credit rating agencies downgraded Greek bonds to junk status, and interest rates on Greek debt skyrocketed. Suddenly, Greece couldn't afford to borrow money at any price. Finally, Greece's updated numbers. Deficit at 6%, debt manageable. Actually, small recalculation. The deficit is closer to 12.7%, and we may have used some creative accounting with Goldman Sachs. You've been lying to us for a decade. Lying is such a harsh word. We prefer optimistically interpreting fiscal data, and about that debt, we're going to need some help. By early 2010, Greece was on the brink of default. If Greece couldn't pay its massive debts, European banks holding billions in Greek bonds would take massive losses. The crisis could spread to Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Italy. The entire Eurozone could collapse. The Troika, which consisted of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, stepped in with a historic rescue package, 110 billion euros to keep Greece afloat.
What is euro to Canadian? What is €1 to a Canadian dollar? Because I know euros are like they're higher value. 1.6 Canadian. 1.5 times. Okay.
But the money came with
The scale doesn't change that much.
brutal strings attached. The Troika believed that fiscal discipline would restore confidence, bring debt under control, and set Greece on a path to recovery. The theory sounded reasonable, but the results in reality were catastrophic. As Greece hiked taxes and slashed spending, the economy contracted sharply.
I mean, that is going to happen. When you get into a debt crisis, you got to raise taxes, you got to cut spending, and that is going to slow your
With
economy.
less government money flowing through the economy, businesses struggled, unemployment soared, and tax revenues collapsed even further. The debt-to-GDP ratio, which austerity was supposed to reduce, actually worsened as the economy shrank faster than the debt fell. GDP fell by 7% in 2011 alone.
GDP per capita. So is this here the 25% drop that we're looking at? Was this section the 25% drop we're looking at? Yeah, because 2008 and 2009. The start of the crisis.
Unemployment hit 18% and kept climbing.
I mean, what did it say? Like 27% was the top.
Thousands of businesses closed.
60%
Young Greeks
for
fled
youth.
the country in search of work abroad, and yet the debt kept ballooning. Greece was caught in a death spiral. Austerity caused a recession. The recession reduced tax revenue, and lower revenue led to more austerity. The antidote had become the poison. Now, Greece wasn't the first country to suffer this fate. Across the Atlantic, Argentina had endured a similar debt crisis just a few years earlier.
Really? Argentina? Excuse me while I write that one down. Okay.
In the early 2000s, Argentina followed IMF-imposed austerity measures,
Yep.
slashing pensions, cutting government salaries, raising taxes. The result?
These are all things that are going to force a contraction to your economy. So basically, when you live beyond your means and deficit spending, it actually grows the economy, and it grows the economy too much, and then when you begin austerity and lowering living standards, it caused a contraction, and it kind of depends on how good your fundamentals are. And apparently they were pretty bad. Greece.
Economic catastrophe. The harsh measures deepened Argentina's recession, making debt repayment even harder and trapping the country in a vicious cycle it still hasn't escaped. Since 1956, Argentina
down
has
at one point.
defaulted 9 times and entered 21 separate IMF programs. The pattern was
Whoa.
identical. Debt crisis, austerity demands, economic collapse, repeat. Yet somehow, when Greece's turn came, European leaders and the IMF prescribed the exact same medicine, expecting
I mean, like, it's the only thing you can do. You have to pay back the deficit somehow. And like, I can understand if you push too hard, there's a collapse, and you don't want that. But if you have a huge debt, you have to get into a position where you're paying the debt off and not adding to it. Deficit spending is no longer allowed. And apparently it caused the collapse because they were so dependent on deficit spending.
different results. By
Can you chart out Canada's deficit or surplus spending for the past 15 years? Let's see. Can I ask for a chart? Will it give it to me? Oh, it's taking its time. Okay. All right. Who won? Oh, they move on. Look at it. Oh, beautiful. No. I'm gonna have to watch. That's great. Okay. It's gonna take its sweet time.
2012, it was clear Greece needed even more help. The Troika arranged a second bailout, 130 billion euros combined with a historic debt restructuring. Private creditors holding Greek bonds agreed to accept a 50% haircut.
Oh. So, one of the issues here is that banks and institutions take on debt from other banks and institutions. And so, when you have a debt crisis like this in Greece, if I assume the financial system is integrated, if you allow Greece to default, you will have a structural problem in banks all across the EU. Anything that's integrated with them and has been purchasing their bonds, suddenly they face the loss of that because of the default. And when that updates in their balance sheet, it could cause structural issues in the institution that is not defaulting. And it could cause a default. And this is why they were talking about, this could cause Spain and Italy and Ireland to also enter crisis, because this default could have pushed other banks and other institutions into default. And this is how you kind of get a cascade, because even you see this in the US when one institution fails, all of the other institutions that are connected to it and have like derivatives or have purchased debt from it, they all suffer massively. And this is when you can get a cascade of issues, because one link in the chain was weak, and Greece was the weak link here. And it looks like, rather than a full default, They're looking at like a half default, is what I'm guessing.
writing off half of what they were owed.
Yeah, so they're looking at like a half default, just so that they get to actually keep half, because the alternative is a complete default.
It was the most extensive sovereign debt restructuring in history. More austerity followed. Pension cuts deepened. Taxes rose again. Public services were gutted. Healthcare budgets were slashed. Schools closed. On the ground, Greek
Like
society.
that is all horrible. Okay, I wanted a chart. Ooh, who was leading us back in 2014, 2015? We got a 1.9 billion. Oh, was that the COVID spending? Ooh, that was terrible. The only surplus was 1.9, and then they've just been living beyond their means. Tiny deficit, or that's like nothing. But every other one, oh my goodness. My goodness. Why could we not have more surpluses? Why do you guys always have to be in the red? I don't like being in the red. So the Harper years, 2009 to 2015. Massive deficit. 2000, when was that? 2008? Oh, I didn't get that one here. But like the Harper years, at least the deficits were low and there was a surplus. And now, past 8 were Trudeau, right? His first term wasn't so bad, and then his second term he just stopped caring. Carney, I mean, like, that's your first one, minus 36.3 billion. That's not what I like to see. I mean, COVID, it's hard to blame someone for COVID, though. You didn't cause COVID. You were just trying to keep the economy from imploding during COVID. I imagine most countries have that one.
Society was collapsing. Unemployment reached 27.5% in 2013, one of the highest rates ever recorded in a developed country in peacetime. Youth unemployment hit an apocalyptic 58%. Nearly
not quite
1 in
60.
3 Greeks fell below the poverty line. Soup kitchens appeared in Athens, feeding tens of thousands who used to be middle class. An entire generation saw their futures evaporate. The social fabric was torn apart as protests and riots broke out. Far-right and far-left parties surged in popularity. The Greek people felt
I
betrayed.
mean, like, this is what we're seeing largely now, but we're seeing it everywhere. Is Greece like the cautionary tale of what's to come? Because we're currently seeing far left and far right parties surge in popularity. And in all countries that have a high debt to GDP ratio.
By their own government, by Europe, by the banks, by everyone. The human cost of the crisis was staggering. Greece's economic disaster turned into a humanitarian crisis unfolding in the heart of Europe. By 2015, Greeks had endured
Like it's off to the side of you. Okay.
5 years of brutal austerity with no end in sight. They were exhausted, angry, and desperate for change. In January 2015, they elected Syriza, a far left-wing party that promised to end austerity and renegotiate the bailout terms with Europe. Their message was simple. Greece had suffered enough. The Troika's medicine had failed. It was time to demand a better deal. For
You
months,
mean like what? They kick you out if you don't pay your debts?
Greece's new government negotiated with European leaders, demanding debt relief and an end to austerity. Europe refused to budge. banks began hemorrhaging deposits as Greeks feared the worst. Capital controls were imposed. Greeks could only withdraw 60 euros per day from ATMs.
Really?
Then, in June 2015, Greece did the unthinkable. It missed a 1.6 billion euro payment to the IMF, becoming the first developed country to default on an IMF loan. The Greek banking system froze. Europe faced a choice: let Greece collapse and risk contagion across the continent, or offer one more lifeline. After tense all-night negotiations, a third bailout was arranged, 86 billion euros. But the conditions were even harsher than before.
I mean, they
The
gotta
dream
be.
of defying austerity had failed. Greece had no choice but to accept the deal and continue down the painful path to recovery. By the time the dust settled, Greece's economy had shrunk by 25%, a contraction rivaled only by the Great Depression. Debt to GDP peaked above 180%, higher than at the start of the crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Greeks had emigrated, and an entire
Wait. Move my. So, the crisis is here. 2008, 2009. So, once the crisis started, they still had to take out more deficit spending. Like it's more even, but there's still quite a bit of deficit spending. And then here it's massive.
Hundreds of thousands of Greeks had emigrated, and an entire decade had been lost. So what went wrong? Well, first, Greece's original sin was fiscal mismanagement and fraud, driven by a fixation on the immediate short-term win of adopting the euro at any cost, even by cheating. Hiding debt through Goldman Sachs swaps, cooking the books,
I mean, just don't work with Goldman Sachs. Clearly, if your government starts working with Goldman Sachs, you should be worried.
ignoring structural problems created a house of cards destined to collapse. Second, the Eurozone's design had structural flaws that constrained weaker balance sheets. Countries sharing a currency couldn't adjust exchange rates or print money during crises. Greece was stuck with a one-size-fits-all monetary policy designed for
I
power.
mean, like at the same time, their boom was because they joined the Eurozone, but it's also what stopped them from being able to fix their problem. Because if you just print and devalue your currency, it does help. Like you could have escaped without this much damage. Devaluing currency it prevents your people from, prevents their money from going further, right? But it can stop a collapse. This is why countries that have their own currency are just structurally so much more stable. When you look at a country in the Eurozone, you actually got to consider it kind of like a state or a provincial finance, rather than a sovereign country's finance. They don't control their own currency.
Powerhouse economies like Germany, not for its own very different needs. Third, austerity during a recession is economic malpractice.
Oh, like that. When a recession hits, this is when you spend. And then you do the austerity when you're in the boom times, and you do austerity when you're in the boom times, and you do spending when you're in the bad times. This is how a government is supposed to like take the wild swings out of an economy and give people a more stable standard of living, that hopefully stable standard of living that goes up is the goal. You get booms and you get busts, but it's usually on an upward trend. And so you try and taper that. But governments are not good at that.
Cutting spending and raising taxes in the middle of an economic downturn doesn't restore confidence.
No.
It deepens the recession. Greece needed stimulus and investment, not austerity. But the Troika
Like, how do you, when the crisis is debt, you can't allow them to go further into debt. This is a debt crisis. Debt doesn't solve it.
dominated by creditor nations worried about moral hazard, demanded harsh cuts anyway. Finally, when you prioritize saving banks over helping people, you get political chaos. The bailouts rescued European banks holding Greek debt, but ordinary Greek citizens paid the price.
Yeah.
Greece officially exited its bailout programs in 2018, but the scars remain. Unemployment, though improved, is still high. Debt remains crushing. An entire generation lost its prime earning years. Greece's slow recovery proves that economies can survive near-death experiences, but prevention
Greece's experience, like, okay, let's hear him say that one more time.
recovery proves that crushing. An entire generation lost its prime earning years. Greece's slow recovery proves that economies can survive near-death experiences.
Economies can survive near-death experience. I mean, I personally think you would have been better letting it die and then just starting again. But maybe, maybe the near-death experience is preferable. I don't know.
But prevention is better than a cure. Strong institutions with sound fiscal policy,
Yep,
transparency, and accountability are not only foundations of economic stability.
This is why the derivative market scares me so much, because there's just zero transparency, right? I mean, you can have all the sound fiscal policy and strong institutions. If so much money is just being used in untransparent markets, it can still cause massive damage. We also see this in what is it? Private equity. All the money in private equity, you have no idea how much of that is bad. Some of the things you hear coming out of there, oh, this company bought this company, and then all the money they spent on it, they transferred that as debt to company A. And then they gave the company A more debt because they wanted to take a profit. And all of a sudden, company A is so in debt that it has no chance of survival. And it's left to just go bankrupt with all the debt. And then, like, it's not like that money disappears, right? When there's a debt, when that money went somewhere. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that too much today. But transparency is very important, and I am very skeptical of untransparency. But I did think of a couple more things I want to add to my list. Private equity. I'm going to look into that more. And derivative market. Two untransparent ones that I think we might have problems with.
But also human prosperity and well-being.
Yes.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our previous video covering Japan's lost decades and how a promising superpower that seemed to have everything going for it fell into decades-long stagnation.
Natural economics. This might be talking about the turnaround. When we were looking at Greece, we were reading that current economic numbers are really good, going in the right direction. Still 20%, I always cut it to 20, but 18% lower. Their GDP is 18% lower than it was at its prime, 2008. So let's see what they got to say about it. Check the stream. Okay, everything's going well.
Greece
we go.
is one of the most important economies in the world, and that's not because of its size, where it's just middle of the pack, even within Europe, but
Okay.
rather how it has influenced the modern global economic landscape in more ways than even the country itself probably realizes. Global trade, which has become one of the defining
Like, is it the cautionary tale for every country that we're all ignoring because it was so long ago now that we need another country to sacrifice itself, the debt gods, so that we can all see how horrible it is and then become fiscally more responsible?
characteristics of our modern world is overwhelmingly handled by
Hopefully.
ships from just one country.
Hopefully it's not Canada that gets sacrificed. I mean, like, if we're looking at the sacrifice. Go. Net debt to GDP. Yeah, these are debts. Debt to GDP doesn't capture the whole. Okay, okay. You know what? We're gonna try and use this one. Klon. What countries have the highest net debt to GDP ratio? Are any countries in risk of a Greece-style collapse? Let's see, who are we sacrificing to the debt gods? Ruminating on it, thinking. Okay, while you think, we'll continue.
Greece is also at the center of tensions between the most powerful military alliance in history, and this otherwise unassuming country has contributed and perhaps challenged a lot more than that as well. Of course, today Greece is as well known
I mean, like, beautiful place. Like, the ancient Greeks knew how to pick a spot for their temple and their Colosseum. Or that's not Colosseum. Stadium. What a nice looking place. Okay. I didn't ask you, I asked you. Here we go. Here we go. It knows I like charts now. So Sudan, I think that's a pretty small country. Singapore, really? I thought Singapore was fiscally responsible. It's not. Venezuela, Greece is still really high. The big economies, Japan, 230% of GDP. Greece is still high. I don't know. Italy, that's a dangerous level. Are these net debt numbers? Canada. I don't like that. Okay, let's see what it says. The headline numbers, 2025 IMF data. Global debt has hit 111 trillion in 2025, equal to about 94.7% of world GDP. We're almost at 100% of world GDP, guys. Doing bad. Japan remains the most indebted major economy at 230% of GDP, reflecting decades of fiscal stimulus and aging demographic. Who's actually at risk of a Greece-style collapse? Here we go. A Greece-style crisis requires a specific cocktail. High debt, inability to control your own currency. Oh, yeah. Inability to control your own currency. Rising bond yields, slow growth, and a lot of market access. Here's how the main candidates stack up. France, the most watched right now. France, debt to GDP ratio stood at 104% as of Q1 of 2025, third highest in the Eurozone after Greece and Italy. All three major rating agencies have downgraded French sovereign debt in the past year. The IMF projects France debt will rise towards 130 by 2030, diverging from the consolidation path of most of the Eurozone. Debt servicing costs are expected to surge to 59.3 billion in 2026, up from 36.2 billion in 2020. And France continues to run a primary budget deficit with no clear political path to fix it. The political gridlock under Macron makes reform very difficult. Uh-oh. Danger, France. That's a danger. Italy. Stabilizing but fragile. Counterintuitively, Italy is actually improving. Italy has undergone a gradual but increased convincing rehabilitation. Its debt trajectory has stabilized. Debt maturity is long. Refinancing risk is contained. And it achieved a primary surplus and reduction to its deficit to around 3% of GDP in 2025, exiting the EU's excessive deficit procedure. Italian bond yields, while still elevated, are near the lowest spread versus German bonds in 2 decades. Lebanon, Sudan, Venezuela, Mozambique. These are already in various states of collapse or default, just not making headlines the same way Greece did because they lack the Eurozone dimension. Oh. So we got a bunch of countries in collapse. Huh? I like to look at collapsing. We will put you Argentina. Countries I should as a cautionary tale. Why another Greece-style drama is harder to repeat in Europe. The institutional landscape has changed substantially. The EBC, European Commission, and ESM now provide institutional backstops that didn't exist in the same form during the 2010 to 2012 crisis. So they've learned. Okay, don't let JP Morgan hide your debt, because that causes problems. The EBC, the ECB can intervene in bond markets to prevent runaway yields, which is exactly what prevented Italy and Spain from imploding during the 2022 rate hiking cycle. Oh, so they've already done this in Italy and Spain, which is probably why Italy was in that I don't know what they called it again. But they were in a program to control deficit spending. That said, the OECD warns that rising interest payments, persistent budget deficits, and falling inflation are expected to push the OECD debt to GDP ratio higher in 2026, and 42% of all global sovereign debt matures in 2027, meaning debt underwritten during near zero interest rate periods will need to be refinanced at today's higher rates. That refinancing wave is the next big test. The short answer, France is the country most worth watching for European fiscal stress, while Japan remains an extraordinarily long-running experiment in whether a country can sustain 230% of debt indefinitely. So far, yes, because nearly all Japanese debt is held domestically in yen. So, we will continue that experiment. I do hope nothing goes wrong with that one. Or France. I mean, we don't want another debt issue like what happened in Greece. I imagine if I look into these, I will get plenty of cautionary tales. But the general deficit spending is too large. What is it? We're almost at 100% GDP worldwide. Not good, and my country keeps doing deficit spending. I don't get it. We should be balancing the budget. All right. We only got 30
For
seconds.
its economic challenges as it is for its beautiful islands and historic landmarks.
Like, look at the beauty. Look at the beauty of Greece.
The country has been the poster child of national mismanagement over the past 2 decades. From its peak in 2008, it was the epicenter of the Eurozone crisis, as badly thought out plans in this country rippled across the entire region, causing a decade of stagnation in the world's second largest economic entity. Now, while Greece is not exclusively responsible for Europe's economic troubles in the 2010s, it did play a big part, and it certainly felt the brunt of the slowdown. Before 2008, Greece was one of the fastest growing major economies in the world, with a GDP per capita that...
So, it entered... Sorry. So it entered 2001, and then they got the really good interest rate, and they're like, spend, baby, spend, and look at the line. Look at the line as they spend, baby, spend. Spend, baby, spend. Like you got yourself a nice chart that kind of goes up like this, and if it kept going up like this, you'd be about here. But all of that was just spent on debt.
Tripled in just 8 years.
So look what happened.
The country was capitalizing on the new Eurozone to take advantage of its highly desirable tourist destinations, natural resources, and shipping infrastructure. It was also building at a rapid rate as money flowed from the government as well as local and foreign investors who all wanted to carve out their part of what was predicted to be an ongoing economic miracle. But of course, it wasn't, and the debt of the country and its people had incurred to grow at such a rapid rate came back to bite them when the cash dried up after the global financial crisis.
Yep.
The country was one of the worst hit by this global economic shock, and was one of the worst hit.
I mean, that looks like a nice place. Why haven't they fixed the roof? That's a really nice place. I mean, it's a great looking place. The roof to just fix the roof
by this global economic shock, and a lot of the economic factors that had allowed it to grow so quickly also contributed to its rapid decline, with economic output halving in the country over just...
I mean, look at that. How wealthy do you gotta be to get your house built there? I mean, I say house, but it looks like it's like 6 houses all attached together. 7, 8 houses maybe? A lawn on a roof of a house. And it looks like you have like an hour walk to get down to your car. I don't think you can bring your car up, can you? No. That looks like a footpath. I mean, other than that, that looks like that's an amazing place.
Last 5 years. Beyond headline economic metrics, unemployment hit almost 25%, contributing to significant political and social turmoil. But that might now, after 15 long years, be starting to turn around. Growing any economy in a sustainable manner is incredibly difficult, but regrowing an economy that has already been rich is in many ways much harder still. Despite this, in the first time in over a decade, things are starting to look good for Greece thanks to a combination of assistance from its peers, stable economic management, and other global shocks that have strangely worked in its favour. If Greece can regain stable economic growth, then it will also serve as a great template for other economies suffering from prolonged economic difficulties. So, what caused the Greek economy's massive boom and bust? What caused its economic stagnation to last for so long? And finally, what are the factors that are starting to turn these challenges around? Once we have done all of that, we can put Greece on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. Some of the first videos we made...
Oh, I have not updated. Many times as I say it, it's just not how it goes. Give me a second. I'm gonna probably let this
made on Economics Explained were about the economies of video games, and I still play my fair share. One I've been playing a lot recently is World of Warships, so I'm stoked for them to sponsor this video. Timing. It's a PC 12v12 battle arena game where you fight with massive naval vessels with big cannons. It's incredibly satisfying to aim your cannons and watch the shells fly over kilometers and smash through the hull of an enemy ship. I've put in my hours with other MOBA games, but in World of Warships, there's no messing around farming lanes for 45 minutes. It has much shorter games that cut straight to the PvP fights. but it still has a ton of customizability, with over 600 ships from cruisers to submarines and aircraft carriers to make every game require some strategic thinking to avoid getting outgunned. You don't have to memorize a bazillion hotkeys either, so the learning curve isn't as steep as other games.
I like bazillion hotkeys, okay? I was a WoW gamer. I need all the shift, all the buttons, the control, all the buttons, the A, the alt, all the buttons. Give me all the hotkeys.
In this genre. And because it's free to play, it was easy to convince my friends to pick it up and play together,
Free to play is
and
always
now
nice.
we're all hooked. If you click on my link in the description to play World of Warships on PC, you can use the code HPPYNWYR2024 to unlock a pack of extra doubloons, credits, a free ship, some camouflage skins, and 12 days of a premium account. And if you see a ship called Economics Explained in-game, get ready to lose.
Shoot it.
The economy of Greece wouldn't get as much attention as it does if it wasn't for the rapid growth it experienced in the early 2000s.
Well, I mean, the growth caused the collapse, right? Like, the growth was them deficit spending massive. And that is
lots
what
of countries
came
in
back
the world
to
that are doing far worse than Greece by almost every economic metric, but the tragedy
share of population living below national poverty lines. Really, there's no data on Canada and the US, huh? Ooh. And this is the national poverty, not even like...
tragedy and subsequent intrigue about this particular economy is because, for a while, it looked like an unlikely success story. Unfortunately, the development of the Greek economy in the early 2000s was mainly centered around all of the right industries for all of the wrong reasons. Shipping is one of the core industries of Greece. Since ancient times, this region has spread its influence over the oceans, and that has carried through to the modern day. Greece has the largest merchant marine fleet in the world, and only one other country, Japan, even really comes close. Almost a quarter of all global freight
Wasn't
capacity
China
is
close?
based in Greece.
Vessel's share of total DWT, domestic world trade. Well, I think the only thing that makes sense to me. Yeah, but the numbers,
Only one other country, Japan, even really comes close. Almost a quarter of all global freight capacity is based in Greece. The country built this lead in the aftermath of the Second World War. At this time, Greece had been devastated by occupation, and most of its infrastructure lay in total ruin. To make matters worse, a power vacuum formed after the German forces evacuated from the country, and fighting broke out between Greek power blocks. Now, of course, this period is incredibly complex, and the details are best left to the actual geopolitical experts on our sister channel Context Matters, but from a purely economic point of view, developing industries within the country at this time was going to be incredibly difficult.
Context. Maybe we'll look them up. Cause so far, so we're watching an infographics video. They're actually rated quite highly so far.
Because most of the country's resources were being dedicated to just rebuilding what existed before the war. There was an opportunity, however, to develop a national industry that wasn't strictly within the nation itself, one that wouldn't be at the mercy of crippled infrastructure and political unrest. An industry that would actually benefit from the conditions of the post-war period, and that was, of course, shipping. After the war, there were thousands...
Ooh. Look at that. So this is your shipyard. How do you even get that thing in the water? Oh, look at how tiny these little things are compared to it. These are like containers. Are those people? A person there? These things are massive.
of ships that were used to ferry supplies to military efforts that no longer had any use by the world's navies. These surplus vessels were purchased by emerging shipping families who had mostly fled the country during the war and had become established in the USA. Having US dollars made it easier for these families to purchase US ships, mainly a class of vessel called Liberty ships, which were the basic cargo ships used by the Allies during the war to ferry supplies across the Pacific. To this day, Liberty ships
That's
remain
where-
the most mass-produced ship of all time.
So that's where, during the Second World War, there was a huge increase in ships construction just to ferry supplies over to the war from North America, and like they had a pretty high. A lot of them got sunk too, German U-boats, right? But they built more because many of the supplies got through, and this is one of the things that happened to them after
At the
war.
height of the war, US shipyards were building 3 of these massive vessels every single day. After the war was over, the Allied navies no longer needed these vessels, so they were practically given away to surplus buyers based in the USA. And even though the Greek families that had moved to the US during the war were going to use these ships for Greek shipping companies, that was good enough for the US Navy so long as they reserved the right to commandeer them if war broke out again. The details were fascinating,
Okay.
but what it all meant was that
Ooh, that aircraft carrier's got a bunch of seats set up. This one's clearly in the show and tell stage. Or they're showing it off, and they got tourists coming in probably.
were fascinating, but what it all meant was that Greece was in a perfect position to capitalise on the global trade boom right as it was getting started at the end of the Second World War. The only problem was, this industry kind of sucked. Maritime taxes for ships registered in Greece was very high, as were the salaries demanded by Greek sailors. The Liberty ships were also made with a quantity over quality mindset, and they were prone to snapping in half after too many rough crossings of the Atlantic.
Yeah, they were made for one shipment, you know. A lot of them were going to sink anyway, so
Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, it's clear that Greek shipping companies did figure out a way around these problems, but it's how they did it that says a lot about the nature of the Greek economy, even to this day.
okay.
Their first step was to phase out the Liberty ships for custom-built cargo transports made by the shipyards in the UK that were desperate for work after the end of the war. The next step was to ditch the Greek flag registration and sail their ships under the flag of a country with no taxes on maritime activities.
Absolutely.
These are known as flags of convenience, because since ships aren't tied to one place, it really doesn't matter where they are registered. For the same reasons, they also ditched the Greek crews in favour of whoever would work for the lowest cost.
Indonesia, Panama, China, Japan. Fleet strength. So these are their fleet strengths. So this is where they're registered.
Another business practice that Greek shipping companies became infamous for was not being too concerned about what was being shipped or to whom. Even today, while Greece accounts for a massive share of the global shipping fleet, it's really a Greek operation in name only. Most of the ships trade foreign goods under foreign flags between foreign countries with foreign crews, all to make the most profit possible for foreign investors. A lot of Greek shipping isn't even managed from Greece anymore, as operations have moved to countries like the UK, Singapore, and even Norway. Greece's presence in the EU is really
Well, then
the only
how do you call them Greek if nothing is Greek about them?
thing keeping these ships in any way related to Greece.
Okay, he just explained that.
Anything keeping these ships in Greek shipping isn't even managed from Greece anymore, as operations have moved to countries like the UK, Singapore, and even Norway. Greece's presence in the EU is really the only thing keeping these ships in any way related to Greece. The industry has massive influence in the country, and they've used that to push favourable trade conditions and considerations for their ships, while only contributing about 1% of economic output. Now, the
Ooh,
story of Greek shipping
That's not the kind of industry you want. I'm just going to be honest with you. That industry does not sound like it pays its fair share.
and how it evolved with global trade over the past half century is fascinating in its own right. But the way it grew so large while providing so little real value to the Greek economy is something that is common amongst not just shipping, but most of Greece's major industries. The growth boom of the early 2000s was mostly driven by construction. The adoption of the euro also helped to develop other industries like tourism and manufacturing. The Greek drachma, which the euro replaced, was a highly unstable currency, which made planning long-term business deals or even a holiday surprisingly difficult. The real benefit of the new currency, though, was that it made borrowing money from abroad far easier. The economic boom of the early 2000s did about as much real good for the Greek economy as its shipping industry. On paper, it looked very impressive, but in reality, most of the benefit was not
Let's see if we can map this out. So if we follow the casual increase line, where Where should, like, there's a dip there, so where should it be? I mean, after their boom and then their bust and stagnation. I mean, they're kind of where they would have been. Oh my gosh, this is the evolution of debt. I'm not even looking at the right chart. So, they enter the Eurozone. Debt explodes. Absolutely explodes. They get low interest rates. Their debt just goes through the roof. Where is it? 2008, 2009 is the beginning of their debt crisis. Their debt still goes up from there. They've kind of brought it down. Thin.
Going to the country itself. Most of the debt taken on was put into developing infrastructure, which could be a good investment, only most of this infrastructure was not going to support long-term sustainable industries like manufacturing, services, or even tourism. They were going to support the development of houses for local and foreign investors to speculate on. In the years between 2000 and 2008, net inflows of foreign direct investment accounted for as much as 2% of all GDP, which means, in a sense, every year 2% of the country's total output was being sold to foreign investors. Now, again, foreign investment can be a great thing for an economy if it's used to build out industries that will contribute to employment and value creation in the future. Unfortunately, in Greece, most of this money was going straight into buying homes on the coast. Building a home will increase economic output quite significantly on paper, because a home is a major good being produced. It's also great for employment because building even a basic house will keep a lot of workers busy for a long time, and that's before considering the extra production that comes from building roads and plumbing systems and electrical connections to service this new home. The problem with economic growth achieved this way is that once it's built, whoever lives in that home probably won't need a new home for a long time. That home also doesn't produce anything that can be traded to pay off the ever-expanding debt that Greece was taking on to fuel this economic bubble. And to make matters worse, just like the shipping magnates, people working in these industries were not too keen on paying any taxes. This whole scheme probably could have kept on going longer than it did, but the global financial crisis meant that the new homes that Greece was busy building and selling to anybody who would buy them were worth a lot less than they were in the years before, and the country found it much harder to keep on borrowing because most major economies around the world at this time wanted as much money as they could get on their hands to support their own economies, so giving loans to a country like Greece was low on their priority list. These challenges combined to kick off the Eurozone crisis. The millions of workers that have been employed in the country's building industry were mostly out of work. The country had to impose austerity to manage its debts, and since it had adopted the euro...
So they're in the EU, the crisis happens here, and then it's just a decline. Like it's not even instant, the employment is a slow drop.
It couldn't even devalue its own currency to try and make things like tourism more affordable. The euro gave Greece a great opportunity for development, but it was just a tool, and like any tool, it could be used to do a lot of good or a lot of damage if not managed correctly. Tragically, the country shouldn't have even really been allowed to adopt the euro in the first place. When the currency was being rolled out, new members had strict requirements about how much foreign debt they were allowed to hold. Last month we explored how this caused Italy to spend almost half a decade cleaning up their act to get into this club. Greece again took the same approach as its shipping magnates and just tried to cheat its way around it.
I mean, I was like looking at Greece. Look at that.
Approaches its
what a place.
Shipping magnates and just tried to cheat its way around entry requirements into the euro. If it wasn't for a bit of creative accounting, it may not have had the opportunity to ditch its own currency for another decade. This also meant that the debt problem in Greece in the lead up to the crisis was a lot worse than the headline figures would suggest. Either way, the decade that followed the initial crash was incredibly rough. The heightened unemployment caused more drain on overly generous welfare systems, which in turn worsened the government's budget problems. When the country made the obvious decision to lower spending on these programs and chase up on tax dodgers more diligently, it caused major social issues with demonstrations in Greek cities making headlines around the world. This also hurt industries like tourism, which remained fairly stagnant in the country over this time, despite the general growth of...
Wow. Place is beautiful. We're looking at Greece tourism statistics. Spending in millions. Percentage of exposure. Well, spending in millions is what you look at. What's the drop?
Tourism worldwide. Now, raising taxes and lowering spending is normally the
COVID.
last thing an economy wants to do during bad times,
Yep.
because it means that there is less money circulating around the economy for the few businesses that are left to employ people and produce value. But in the case of Greece, it was a necessary step towards regaining creditworthiness, and as bad as it sounds to say, get their people to move into industries that may pay less, but will be more sustainable long term. People working in the construction industry before the collapse in particular were making incredibly good money by building the houses and infrastructure fueling the unsustainable boom. It takes time and some fiscal motivation to get workers used to making a lot of money in an unsustainable way to take up work in a more sustainable industry where they will be earning less money.
Yeah.
But that has now happened. Unemployment in Greece is still high, but it's far lower than it was half a decade ago, and it's improving. The debt burden of the country has been managed, and thanks to a series of bailout measures from international organisations and some debt write-downs by private banks, combined with more careful government budgeting, the country is now considered creditworthy again. The global pandemic has also been, in many ways, a blessing in disguise for Greece. Sure, it hurt the economy from losing tourist revenues and a general slowdown in trade and industry, but other countries in the EU were hurt more, and the low interest rates rolled out to combat the impact of the slowdown also helped Greece get its other problems in order. Greece may take a long time to get back to the level of economic prosperity it was enjoying in 2007, but that's kind of the point. Slow and stable economic development is
Like, look at these places.
exactly what the country
What
needs.
history this
And
place
if
has.
it can recover with this more measured approach, then its economic success is likely to last a lot longer than it did in the past. Okay, now it's time to put Greece, one of the most infamous economies of the last decade, on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. Starting as always with size, Greece currently has a GDP of $219 billion US, making it the 54th largest economy in the world, just behind Kazakhstan. That is again predicted to grow quite significantly over the next few years, so hopefully we can give it a better score when we explore this economy in the future, but for now it gets a 6 out of 10. That GDP is spread out over a declining population of 10.4 million people, which means it has a GDP per capita of $20,732 US per year.
That's higher
That
than
is
the
a
population I
significant
was
drop
looking
from its
at.
all-time high of over $32,000
This is 2 years
US in
old.
2008, especially when accounting for inflation. Even though it's still roughly double the global average, it's really stretching what would typically be considered an advanced economy, so Greece gets a 6 out of 10. Stability
pretty
and
high.
confidence is obviously terrible, but it's also all relative. By European standards, the country has been plagued by reckless borrowing, political instability, and general economic mismanagement, which has got a lot of global attention because it's caused a lot of harm to its Eurozone peers. Even still, by global standards, there are countries that inspire far less confidence because they are far less stable. Greece gets a 5 out of 10, which is
Middle
not
of the
great,
road.
but is fair considering that it's still a democracy, still using the world's second most recognised currency, and has even made progress towards resolving major issues that caused this instability in the first place. Growth is simply a 0 out of 10 because the country has gone backwards over the last decade for all of the reasons that we've
Minus
explored in this video.
18%.
Industry might be the most interesting component here. Greece does technically have the world lead in one of the most important global industries, shipping. But given the nature of this industry and the influence that it's had over the
it's not
country,
really-
not much of the benefits flow back into the domestic economy. Even still, with the addition of tourism, high-end agriculture, and a healthy supply of natural resources, it still gets a very strong 7 out of 10.
Okay.
Altogether, that gives Greece an average score of 4.8 out of 10, which is obviously not great, but might still be higher than most people would expect, which is a fantastic demonstration of all economic challenges being relative. Now, there were a lot of similarities between the Greek and Italian economy that we didn't want to repeat here.
Okay. So, the Greek economy does appear to be moving in the correct direction. They're still 18% lower than they were in their prime. Which sucks.